Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Nicole Sauce's Thought of the Walk. There may be a hand in front of the camera. I don't know. I'm here in my outdoor kitchen right now, not walking. I'm going to take the dogs for a walk here in a bit, but I was thinking I have been promising a Harvest Right update for a while, and I want to share with you 3 things that after I've been using the Harvest Right freeze dryer for a couple of months, I've learned. I did take a 6-week break in August, about 6 weeks off of running it because it was over 95 degrees here every day and I didn't want to run it when it was super hot, and I have it outside. So we did take some time off, but that actually gave me impetus to learn some stuff. So this is my outdoor kitchen, and we're getting ready for an event. So I've got a big old stack of hollow roast mugs that are cleaned up. We've got an ice maker going, and in general, my outdoor kitchen is what I use for canning. So you'll see there's all this stuff in here. There's a microwave because I don't have one in my house, the blender I use, a big giant coffee urn for making coffee. This is just how I'm organizing, you know, the oil straining. So those jars I put oil into from the Harvest Right after I've filtered it. Got the ice maker out for the event. Canning supplies in the back. Well, this is always fun. The country kitchen always has something going on. Beeswax, which I will process and melt eventually. I'm hanging some herbs here. Got the sage going from the garden. But let's get to the Harvest Right. There's some things, crock pot, there's some things we do with the Harvest Right that can make our lives easier. And one of the things that I keep hearing about starts with the trays. This is a tray for the medium Harvest Right freeze dryer. And I get these things set up and I pre-freeze. So I'll stack them. I have these little corner stacky things, and I stack them and pre-freeze things because a lot of what I'm freeze drying, guys, is milk and eggs. And it works way better if I pre-freeze those than if I put it in the Harvest Right. And that's great, but this set of trays is, you know, I've seen them as cheap as 50 bucks. They're around 80 bucks. It's a lot of money after you just spent $2,700 on a freeze dryer to get them, but you know, over time you figure you can. And as I said, I just went through this period of time where I could not run it without it being way too hot, because it was 95 degrees outside. Even with a fan on the vacuum pump, it was just not a great fit, so I decided to wait. Well, what ended up happening is these trays ended up in my freezer with stuff in them frozen. I was freezing in Ziploc baggies, which works, but the key is, you see how thick this is? This is just under an inch, and you do not want your food up over the lip of this. And what I did is I froze things a little too thick. It's hard to freeze thin enough for things to work. And so then I got into doing, you know, with things that break in half, a full-size cookie sheet and keeping it thin, and then I could break it in half, but then it's like just exposed to the air in there, which is not great. And then I discovered these. This is something you can get on Amazon. I'll throw a link in the show notes, but 2 of these little pans equal 1 shelf. They're a little bit deeper, as you can see, than the Harvest Right trays. But these are like 20 bucks for 5 or $25 for 5 of them. So they're way cheaper over time, and they're way more convenient to use. Way more convenient to use. And what that means is that I can have these on hand and then make sure I only fill them up. There's even like, it's brushed nickel texture here and then shiny down lower on these. If you just keep it to the shiny area and don't overfill them, you end up able to stack these, you know, like that, in your freezer. You don't even need a special corner stacking thing, because as long as you don't overfill them, you can just put something across there and then the next one, or they stagger really well like this in your freezer. This is just, see what I'm doing there? You stack it one way, then you rotate it 90 degrees and you stack it another way. You end up with a freezer stack. And then once it's frozen, you can just put saran wrap on top of each one and then stack them a little bit more efficiently in your freezer and then do your next batch. The other thing you can do with these smaller trays, a little bit easier, is pre-freeze things and then dump them out, you know, like big giant milk ice cubes, and put those in Ziploc baggies. And then when you're ready to freeze dry them, put them in the bigger Harvest Right trays and put them in the freeze dryer. So I did a test run with these, and they worked great. I did watermelon and had it all staged and ready to go. And when it finally dropped down cool enough, I ended up freeze drying watermelon, which is fantastic. I don't actually eat very much fruit or sugar anyway, but for a hiking snack, that's going to be really good. The thing about freeze drying watermelon is it took 48 hours. It took a long, long time. I sliced it thinly. It took a long time, and then I had to put it back in. That's how much water is in that. So that's the one thing. You can find tray alternatives that work well, or you can just get a bunch of trays for Harvest Right, or you can put things in baggies. But if you are wanting to optimize the use of your freeze dryer, I highly recommend finding ways to pre-freeze things on a cycle that makes it so at any time you have something ready to go in that freeze dryer. The other thing is I learned is, or have, almost made a huge mistake with, revolves around changing the oil. And I have the basic pump. I also have the Premier pump. I do not have the oilless pump. So I'm changing oil every time. I've only kept the base level pump in so far. I haven't used the Premier pump. We'll be doing that this winter. And what you do is you run the freeze dryer, and then it goes through a defrost cycle after that, or it has to defrost anyway. Like, you can not run it and let the air defrost it. And at that time, to do the oil change, I just open the oil drain and pull out a plug. And for those of you who are on the audio, I'm holding up the plug you pull out, which is a little red plastic plug that I wish was metal, because it's going to last. Because I unscrew this like several times a week and screw it back in. It's very easy to cross-thread plastic. And so I'm always afraid I'm going to go in at the wrong angle and somehow cross-thread this. Be that as it may, I have this plastic plug that I wish was metal, and there's a gasket in it. And the second time I took this off, because you have to let air in for the oil to come out the other side, I unscrewed it, and the gasket that is between this plug and the pump didn't stick to the plug. It stuck to the pump, and I didn't notice. And I was just lucky that later in the day I saw this strange texture on the top of the pump, and there was this gasket that would have been so easy to knock off of the pump and lose. And if I hadn't, if I didn't know it was there, I would then screw this plug back in and not achieve a vacuum seal on my next load. So it's really important, if you have a pump where you take a plug out and the plug has a gasket, to keep your eye on the gasket and make sure you keep track of that. The other thing is, you don't want this plug to get gritty or dirty. I've just moved the Harvest Right into the prepper pantry, where it will be out of the outside. It was fine outside, while it was kind of not too cold outside, but it's going to get into freezing temperatures soon, and I don't want that out getting icy, right? So it's one thing to run it in a house with air conditioning going on and that sort of thing. You get little dust, but if you are in something like my prepper pantry, it gets a little gritty in there sometimes. So I'm pretty careful. I have a dedicated canning jar lid. That's one of those plastic lids you screw on a mason jar, that I put the plug in when I pull it out, so I don't lose it, because it would be really easy to kick that around and lose it. And then I also always make sure I see the gasket on the plug when I pull it out, and if I don't, I pick up the gasket off of the pump and I put it on the plug, and then I put the plug aside so I don't use it. So that's another thing I've realized is a potential pitfall for somebody who has a Harvest Right that can lead to hours of frustration later. Hours of frustration. And then the last thing has to do with touching the food. If you touch freeze-dried food, it's absolutely dry. It will suck nasty oils out of your hands, no matter how many times you have washed your hands. And whatever's on your hand is what gets sucked out, right? These little cheap plastic gloves, you can still feel if the food feels cool, which would mean it's not dehydrated all the way. You can still feel that with these gloves, way better than rubber gloves, and it provides a barrier between the oils in your hands and the food, so you don't get like nasty hand oil into your freeze-dried foods. So these things, like, I don't know, 4 boxes of them at Sam's Club are probably $10. They're super cheap. You can get just 1 box different places. They're food service gloves. They're very thin plastic. I'm going to put a link to some in today's summary, just so you, if you're looking for what I'm talking about, you can. But you can just buy them off the shelf at most stores of the Walmart variety, or Fred Meyer, or whatever you have in your area. Those are all the places you can get them. So those are my three things from the Harvest Right freeze dryer, and I hope you found this interesting. If you did, share this video with a friend. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button. And of course, if you're going to buy a Harvest Right freeze dryer, I do have an affiliate link. It's also in the summary of this. I would appreciate it if you use that link, but you don't have to. It's all up to you. Of course, I get a commission if you do. Make it a great week.